Imagine waking up tomorrow with everything you thought you needed. Success, recognition, even comfort, yet still feeling an emptiness gnawing at your chest. An emptiness no achievement can fill. This is the truth Carl Jung uncovered about addiction. It isn't just a bad habit, a weakness, or even a medical condition. At its core, it is the echo of a soul that has lost its connection to what truly matters. When someone turns to drugs, they rarely do it simply to escape pain. Often, without realizing it, they're chasing something far deeper, a desperate attempt to touch a sense of wholeness that life has stolen from them. Jung saw addiction not as a shallow problem, but as an existential wound. A wound that doesn't bleed, but one that silently tears through a person's entire being. And here's the shocking part. It's not only about drugs. This hunger for intensity, for meaning, hides inside all of us. But what happens when the search for transformation takes the wrong path? That's where the story begins. Picture this. A person feels like they're drifting through life as if nothing has real weight. Days blur into each other. Everything feels shallow, meaningless. Then comes the substance. At first, it doesn't just numb the pain, it feels like a revelation. Suddenly, life has intensity again. The colors sharpen, the heart races, the emptiness fades. It seems like the answer they were searching for, but Jung warned, this is a trap, a distorted ritual, a false promise of transcendence that instead of liberation, chains the soul to endless repetition and decay. You see, what addicts often seek is not mere pleasure. They're not just running from suffering. Deep down, they crave something sacred, the lost experience of feeling whole again. And here's where the tragedy lies. Addiction mimics a spiritual path. It gives the illusion of transformation, of stepping into something greater. But instead of awakening, it delivers destruction. Jung believed that behind every self-destructive behavior, there is a cry from the soul, a hidden need to restore what was excluded from consciousness. But without guidance, that cry turns into a labyrinth with no exit. And here's the question that matters: if the addict's search is really for meaning, what are they actually missing in life? The real wound, Jung explained, doesn't come from the drug itself, it comes from disconnection. Sometimes it begins in childhood, sometimes after a deep emotional fracture. But what matters isn't the specific event. It's the break that follows a rupture with the body, with emotions, with one's own identity. When that inner bond shatters, life feels weightless, like floating in a world where nothing is real. And in that fragile state, the drug arrives like a false anchor, a way to recover the density that has been lost. But it is only an illusion, a promise of return that never truly comes. Jung saw this clearly. In every addict there is a spiritual hunger. A thirst for transformation, a desperate need for something greater than the flat, mechanical life society offers. Think about it. Our modern culture no longer offers true rites of passage, no real symbols of transformation. Instead, it sells distractions, empty routines, instant gratification. And so, when the soul cries for depth, many people grab the nearest substitute. But here's the paradox. Even inside the darkest spiral of addiction, there remains a spark, a memory of the true transformation that was meant to happen. The question is, can that spark be recovered before it burns out completely? Jung believed addiction isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a cultural one. Our society has forgotten the language of symbols, the bridges between the visible world and the invisible. In ancient times, people had rituals of passageways to transform pain into meaning, chaos into growth. Today, we replace them with consumer goods, shallow entertainment, and endless distractions. And without those bridges, the soul grows restless. For the addict, the drug becomes a distorted symbol. It promises intensity, transcendence, a doorway into another state of being. But without true guidance, that doorway leads only to chains. And here lies a powerful truth. The addict is not simply sick or weak. They are a mirror, reflecting a collective wound. Their extreme behavior is the loud cry of a culture that has lost connection to the sacred. When Jung worked with alcoholics, he discovered that no treatment would ever work unless it touched the spiritual core of the problem. Why? Because what addicts are really searching for isn't escape. It's a more vivid reality, something alive, something meaningful. But when that thirst for depth is channeled through a chemical, the ritual of transformation collapses. What could have been a rebirth turns into a slow self-destruction. And so we face the haunting question: if addiction is a corrupted ritual, what would a true ritual of transformation look like? Jung discovered something fascinating. Addiction is never just about the substance. It's also about archetypes, those timeless forces within the human psyche that shape how we live, dream, and suffer. Take the shadow sorcerer, for example. Not the wise guide, but the manipulator of realities. He whispers, "You can have transformation without effort, power without sacrifice." The drug becomes his tool, a shortcut to worlds that feel transcendent, but without the preparation those worlds demand. Or the fugitive, not simply a coward fleeing pain, but an ancient figure rebelling against a world that feels cold and hostile. The addict under his influence doesn't just want to run away. They want to rescue a part of themselves that couldn't survive in everyday life. And then there's the eternal child. Not innocent, but trapped in a fantasy that life should always be magical, effortless, free of responsibility. To this archetype, every frustration feels like betrayal. And the drug answers. Here is a world where the weight disappears. For a moment, time stops and all burdens fade. But Jung warned these archetypes aren't enemies. The danger is when they act without conscious guidance. When they take control, they become tyrants. Instead of allies, they enslave. The addict no longer chooses, the addiction chooses for them. The substance stops being a symbol of transformation and becomes a chain. And here's the chilling thought: these archetypes don't just haunt addicts. They live in all of us. The question is, are you guiding them or are they guiding you? Jung taught that true healing doesn't begin by rejecting our darkness, it begins by facing it. He called this process the confrontation with the shadow. For the addict, this moment is critical. It's the point where they stop blaming the world, their past, or the substance itself, and begin to see their own role in their downfall. Not as punishment, but as the only door to transformation. Why is this so hard? Because it requires letting go of an identity built around pain. Many people consume not just to numb themselves, but to preserve a version of who they are. An identity inseparable from suffering. To abandon that is to lose orientation, to step into the unknown. And yet within the shadow hides more than darkness. Jung discovered that inside it also lives strength, desire, creativity, willpower, all the forces we repress. When we stop running and truly face it, the shadow ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a forgotten ally. This is why Jung insisted the shadow must not be denied, but integrated. The addict's task is not to erase their suffering, but to listen to it. Because pain, when understood, transforms from chaos into message. But here's the challenge for all of us. Would you dare to face the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding? The anger, the shame, the fear. Because until we do, those shadows don't disappear. They control us from the dark. Jung believed recovery isn't just about giving something up. It's about rediscovering what was always there. He called this journey individuation, the process of becoming whole. And here's the key: wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean never feeling pain again. It means reconciling with every part of yourself, the light and the dark, the strength and the fragility. For the addict, this is the most difficult step, to stop fighting against themselves and instead begin the work of reunification. To see the wound not as an enemy, but as a doorway. Think about it. What if your pain wasn't just a burden, but also a message? What if your deepest wounds could guide you to your truest self? Jung said healing begins the moment we dare to cross the threshold of suffering and stay there long enough to hear what it has to say. This is why the path to wholeness is not about denial, but about courage. The courage to look directly at what we've been running from. The courage to say, yes, this is also me. And with that recognition, something extraordinary happens. The endless cycle of repetition begins to dissolve. The compulsion weakens. The soul, once fragmented, starts to remember its own unity. But here's the paradox. This transformation is not a solitary act. So who or what can walk with you on this journey? Jung insisted no one heals in total isolation. The journey to wholeness requires a witness, someone who sees you, hears you, and does not reduce you to your wound. For the addict used to rejection and misunderstanding, this is revolutionary. Imagine being met not with judgment, but with presence. Not as a problem to be fixed, but as a human being waiting to be rediscovered. This connection can take many forms, therapeutic, spiritual, or simply relational, but its essence is the same. It allows the person to exist beyond their addiction. Recovery, then, is not just about leaving behind a substance. It's about remembering who you are when you are not ruled by the urge to escape. And this doesn't happen overnight. There are setbacks, moments of emptiness, even relapses. But every honest step strengthens the bond with what Jung called the self, the deep, unshakable core of who you are. The self is not an ideal you must achieve. It's a truth that has always lived within you, buried under layers of pain, fear, and forgetfulness. Recovery is not becoming someone new. It's returning to who you have always been. But here's the question Jung leaves us with: if the self has always been there, what stops us from living from that center every single day? Jung's most radical insight was this: what threatens to destroy us can also be what transforms us if we have the courage to face it. Addiction, then, is not just a prison. It is also a crossroad. One path leads to endless repetition, deeper chains a life consumed by shadows. The other leads to awakening, a rebirth into authenticity. And here's the hidden truth. Healing doesn't mean erasing the wound. It means allowing the wound to speak, to guide, to teach. What once looked like ruin can become the root of a stronger self. What once looked like the end can be the beginning. This is why Jung believed that recovery is not about going back to who you were. It's about discovering the self that was always waiting beneath the pain. Not perfection, not invulnerability, but presence, clarity, and freedom. So I ask you, what if your greatest struggle is not your enemy, but your teacher? What if your shadow is not there to destroy you, but to remind you of the wholeness you've forgotten? The choice is always there. Escape or awakening illusion or meaning, and maybe, just maybe, the darkest parts of you are not the end of your story, but the doorway to a life more real than you've ever known.